As I was watching the recording of my last video, I felt a little bit of depression at how poorly my verbal skills really are, or my verbal ability. And I remember getting a similar feeling very often, which is kind of a feeling of a sense of being useless. And there is a kind of an irony here in that part of the reason of why I'm making timeless education is because throughout my life I have kind of arrived at this point as something that I might be able to do, that perhaps there's something that only I can do or someone like me can do, and that I might not be entirely useless after all. And yet, in trying to convey these bits of information or this understanding that I have arrived at, or this knowledge, makes me confront that yet again, this sense of uselessness, in that even though I may be able to think and figure things out and be good at something, I still cannot convey it or make it in a way that appeals to people or that reaches people. Because I guess I could continue to write and only write, but most people would rather prefer to watch videos and so forth. Which makes me remember another thing, that in the beginning I was trying to be very competent, and I was trying to express myself and talk in a way where I sounded very confident, and like I had this impression that people like to listen to someone who talks as if they know what they are talking about, someone who speaks as if they know the truth. But I don't think that there is anyone who really knows the truth, and so it's only in like the spirit of, I guess, a competition in the marketplace of ideas that I try to be as confident and competent as possible. But I also feel that it is important for me to show a little bit of that uselessness. Otherwise people might get the impression that I can do almost anything, that I am able to speak as good as I am in those scripted videos, which is not at all the case. And of course now I did edit the previous video, and as I do with every video, so that even when I am not able to express a lot of things well, I can still cut it so that it still flows somewhat okay. So even the last video is not truly an indication of how difficult it is for me to speak. And I don't know, I'm sure there are other people who are doing videos and things like that who are not naturally good at it, but are able to get certain things made thanks to editing, which is the benefit of making videos over, like, I don't know, going around speaking directly to an audience and things like that. But anyway, I just felt that I needed to mention some of these things, that in some sense it is actually important for the point of some aspects of my teaching that I actually do show some of those things that aren't so competent, in order to get across certain realities, certain authentic aspects of myself, so that people do not get a distorted view of who I am and what I am capable of. And at the same time, I don't want to bore people. I don't want to drive people away from my channel by looking like I'm losing it or like I'm entirely incompetent. So people might sometimes think, well, I don't know what people think, but if people think that my videos are getting worse, that might be because it's not actually the case. That, I mean, I still know how I can do videos like before, but there is a reason for me to change certain things in the approach that I make certain things, in order to simply convey certain things that you cannot just convey with information. I can talk all day about how certain types like abstractum has a tough time in the world, and living and doing things as competently or as good as other people do things. But then when I actually show that, it's interesting to see how people react, how people, it's like they don't understand the reality of it. And I think I have mentioned that my primary energy is abstractum. But I guess not every person watches every video either. It is a kind of an interesting experiment, and it will be interesting to see where things go as I myself explore how much I actually can do with this thing. But do not be surprised if certain things ends up being limited. At the same time, I kind of appreciate these moments where I experience a kind of, I guess you could call it depression, as I face my own limitations. But that depression is important, because impression makes you stop and think and take the reality of one's situation more seriously, so that you can figure out what to do and why things are the way they are, and whether or not you should consider that and drive that forward in some sense. Because in many ways, what motivates people, what is the basis for most people's philosophies, is their own life situation. And I am no different in that respect. And being honest about certain things, certain flaws or certain aspects of one's being, that in this case, in my case, is a kind of uselessness, can be difficult to be honest with, since I have encountered mockery and things like that when I've tried to be honest before, when I tried to engage in discussions about things and it didn't lead anywhere, because many of the frameworks and systems and ideas were so rigid that people stuck to them without any openness to really modify it or change it or challenges to it. And that is another reason why this project is important to me, so that I myself have the freedom from any previous limited systems, so that I myself can build something from the ground up, where I don't have to deal with certain people's attitudes that always turns into a kind of mockery, because people, rather than thinking, are stuck with their feelings And that seems to be the most important thing to people. And that is why I think that it is important to understand human nature by a kind of wiring, and that this is what drives people more than a kind of logic. Logic does not always work on me either. And I think that, I guess you could call it showing vulnerability, is something that does not come easy to many people. And certainly, I especially think those types that are on the right side in my model, under minus, abstractum, libidinum, and excidium, find it especially difficult to show vulnerability or flaws or what have you. And that is something that I personally have learned from Misericordam. Even though I often think that they overdo it, I do see how it can be useful and important to convey certain flaws that you have. And the challenge is to convey that even in the face of mockery or potential mockery. And there are certain ways to deal with that, which I will attempt to experiment with. But overall, this is something that is kind of important to me. And that's why I don't want to show myself as perfect and do everything competently, even though I know that people want things to be competent. So that's one thing that I wanted to mention and get out there.